Good morning, good afternoon, what is it? Late morning, maybe for some. This is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council. And welcome to today's inService podcast event. I'm really pleased. Today's session is brought to us by Aquant. Thank you to Aquant. And I'm so incredibly pleased to be joined by Tas Hirani. She's the Director of Revenue Operations and Enablement of Aquant. A very warm welcome to you, Tas.
Thank you, John. Always a pleasure to get on and have a chat with you.
Outstanding, outstanding. So let me introduce a couple of the housekeeping items here and the topic du jour, if you will. The topic of AI, nobody's confused. It's very hot. It's on the rise. Our research is showing it continues to escalate in terms of priority. One of the things that we continue to hear about is the challenge of, converting within the organization from this notion of exploring, testing, and pilot to actually crossing the chasm to scale. And so today's discussion is going to be built around crossing the AI chasm from pilot to full scale. And I think it's a really timely topic. We just had a members only event hosted at AAA's headquarters. Thank you to AAA. Scott Verbracken and his team hosted our group. And we talked about this very topic, a lot of interesting change management efforts to make sure that there was an organizational shift in terms of mindset. And we're going to talk about that, dig in today around some of the successful pathways that Tas and her organization, Aquant, has witnessed within the context of their customers. And really excited for today's discussion. And we want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have a comment, if you have a question, if you have a reaction, we welcome you to do so. To our LinkedIn Live listeners, thank you for joining us. That is your opportunity to plug in here and pepper us with some questions around either the research data or some of the viewpoints of Tas. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Tas, I know you. We've been colleagues now for a number of years. Could we get a personal introduction for our listening audience?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, Tas Hirani, thank you for having me, firstly. I've been in the service space actually since about 2015 when I left GE Digital to join ServiceMax. I've also worked at Click Software, Salesforce, and I've been here at Aquant for 2 years and some change. And here I'm lucky enough to direct enablement and revenue operations for the go-to-market teams here at Aquant. So that's me in a nutshell.
Outstanding. Well, warm welcome and thank you for the introduction. Now let's Aquant is a household brand in the field service space for many now at this stage. But for those that are unfamiliar, could you talk a little bit about Aquant's journey and a little bit more about the organization?
Sure. I think the interesting thing about Aquant is it helps companies that service other companies' manufactured equipment and companies that manufacture their own. It really helps them with service performance by equipping their teams on that front line and within that service journey with the means to troubleshoot service issues more effectively, and also service managers and those people in leadership positions with the service analytics to really drive that performance. So it's a suite where you can go and check us out on aquant.ai, and you can find out a little bit more about our service co-pilot.
Wonderful. Awesome. So let's get into the topic because AI is one thing, but the concept of acquiring and organizing data isn't exactly new, right? We've been hearing all about business intelligence and analytics, knowledge management, well-defined and growing categories for the last several decades. But AI has kind of burst onto the scenes in recent years with Gen AI and all the things that are happening there. Let's start with framing today's discussion around how do you define AI? Is there, because there's a lot of confusion still in the marketplace, and Aquant has kind of put its own viewpoints out in terms of how they define AI. What can you share that with our listening audience?
Yeah, this is so interesting as it takes me back in time to why I joined Aquant, really. And I was at an inflection point, not even expecting to really join Aquant, but it was really finding out about how they had leveraged AI in the world of service, which is a domain that you and I have both been in for some time. And I think it's super interesting as we've both been through those waves and trends around IoT, the waves and trends about how to leverage augmented reality, and
Yeah.
then listening to companies like Aquant and how they've really harnessed the power of AI to tackle a service problem. So in terms of what do I think AI is in service, I think it really comes down to actually thinking real hard about some of the problems that we have in service and leveraging AI, which is super smart, to actually alleviate those problems as part and parcel of a well-defined service process. I think that's how we talk about it at Aquant. And I know that others think about AI as almost an administrative assistant. Some think about AI as a way to almost have your phone a friend in a certain almost personified. And we think about it, almost in terms of like think about your most amazing superstar and bringing that to life in a co-pilot that you can ask questions to. And that's how I think about AI. I'm not going to lie, I do think about some of those cool movies that we've all watched back in the day. What do you think about that, John? Do you think I answered the question? Was that fair?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, and I know I've heard your founders Shahar and Asaf talk about the difference between horizontal and vertical AI and the
Mhm.
importance of really honing AI to specific market segments and really done a good job capturing the nuances of the industry and applying the technology to the nuances of the industry. So I think you did a great job.
Yeah. I mean, I've got to just chime in because I was listening to one of our customers the other day and just tackling back to what you said about data. I've
Yeah,
just got to quote one of our customers at Varian. It's a great guy called Thomas Maiello. And he was talking about it really comes down to the data. That's the way he talks about it when it comes to AI. Because when you're designing for serviceability, and he was talking about really product innovation and product introduction, the design engineers need to actually be on board with you saying, we can improve the serviceability of this machine by doing X, Y, and Z.
yeah.
And, that's how Thomas talks about data in regards to leveraging that to improve
Yeah.
serviceability. And I think this is a key component that I think here at Quant we've also harnessed in our approach to AI.
I think you bring up something really interesting. First of all, Tom is brilliant. He's a board member of the Service Council, and when he speaks, I listen because he is just a wealth of knowledge. And I love that he comes at AI and the acquisition and assembly of knowledge and data into an improvement opportunity organizationally in terms of supportability, serviceability, creating better products for future field service engineers that are service ready, right? That they're enabled to be service ready. And because we often go to that whole mindset of, well, AI is another upskill and reskilling opportunity in terms of throughput and operations, and how can we do guided workflows so that we don't fall out of rhythm. And I love that when you think about AI more holistically, there's this other aspect of the capture, the assembly, and putting it into context for future generations of products and services. So Tom is he's brilliant and a great wealth of knowledge in that area.
Yeah.
Let's get into those serviceability challenges. Why don't we dive in there?
Mm.
So, according to the Voice of the Field Service Engineer survey conducted by the Service Council, we had over 3,000 technicians. The younger demographic, especially ages 18 to 45, they're leaving the profession in mass still, and it's getting worse, quite honestly. So this year, we witnessed 66 and 80% of Gen X and Gen Y are not committed to to the role for the duration of their career. What's causing the challenge with respect to the engagement? Well, there's friction points in the day to day. There's also perhaps a lack of well-defined career pathing and engagement pathways within the organization. We argue this year that that's should be weighted a little bit more so than the friction points because we should have already solved these friction points. But a lot of the friction points are the same old stuff. It's paperwork and admin, it's time spent finding information,
Yeah.
and then you've got these overwhelming pressure to work faster by both customers and management. So can you talk a little bit about what Aquant's customers are encountering in terms of these friction points and what sort of information and intelligence is really empowering them to be as effective as they can be?
Yeah. Gosh, listening to that, John, I've got to just take you with me into almost like the shoes of the technician,
Absolutely.
because I'm lucky enough to have been on so many ride-alongs and walk the floors in so many contact centers. But I think it really helps to give the audience a bit of context in that when you are a technician and you are, in front of the machine, you are being scrutinized by people who are looking at you and thinking that that asset is costing me, it could be $25 a minute, it could be $500 a minute
Yeah.
being down.
Yeah.
And you are feeling that, those eyes staring at the back of your neck, and you feeling that pressure, and that scrutiny, and whipping out a manual or
Yeah.
opening your phone to start scrolling through things can feel very, very inappropriate
Yeah.
in those situations. And so the easiest thing for people to do is to phone a friend in that situation. And this is, something that's happening time and time again. But essentially, what's going on now is that engineer or that field worker, or that technician, whatever you want to call them, about, they will typically try and do as much as they can before they end up in that situation.
Yeah.
So whatever vehicle, van, becomes almost like kind of their safe space, where you can imagine they will be flipping open their phone, their tablet, their laptop, wherever it is, on the steering wheel, trying to figure out everything they possibly can before they get in front of that broken machine. And this is where what you're talking about in terms of the intelligence and the sources and everything to hand becomes incredibly important, because they want to figure out everything they possibly can in terms of what is going on with that machine, that equipment, that asset. How
Absolutely.
old is it? What is it? What are the typical things that have gone wrong? Who went to see it before me? Why am I being called in? What's gone wrong? What did the person say when they called up? And what was that person? Are they somebody who's experienced,
Yeah.
inexperienced, knows what they're
Yeah.
talking about? And so in that moment, in on top of that steering wheel, that's when there's a moment of magic that either happens or it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that will then impact the fix that happens in front of the asset, because either
Absolutely.
they've got the right equipment or they've got the knowledge they need in that short window of space. And I think it's just not it's really difficult to flip through manuals. And this is where we're hearing from customers that I have a way to search, but it's really time consuming, or it
Yeah.
keeps timing out on my phone, or trying to ask in forums isn't time effective for me. So it's just easier for me to phone a friend. And then on the flip side, one thing I've got to share is that when you have met some of these engineers who are the constant receivers of phone a friend
Yeah.
requests,
Yeah.
it's tough for them,
Yeah.
because they're being sent the most tricky jobs and
Yep.
the most technically challenging ones. And while they're doing these really challenging fixes, they're receiving phone calls about really simple things in their mind. And they're
Yeah.
happy to help because they want to be a team player, but it's also impacting their speed to perform. And when we're measuring everything that a fieldwork is doing,
Yep.
how long it's taking them to travel, how long they're on site, how long is it taking them to troubleshoot, how long is it taking them to fix? To your point, all this admin, all of this becomes stress and
Yeah.
burden. And this is that sweet spot where, in that moment, if you can serve just in time effectively,
Yeah.
that's when I think AI really, that's the sweet spot for me,
A-
where you're
absolutely.
there with them.
Absolutely. And you bring up such an important aspect of this, and that is the criticality of the asset. In some industries, the criticality of the asset is life threatening, right? So take medical and healthcare, right? If a heart monitoring system goes down during surgery, that's not a good thing, right? But the criticality of the asset is also company threatening in terms of revenue and profit in other industries. So take, for example, retail. Coca-Cola, right? Their fountain machines. If that's one of the most profitable aspects of a McDonald's, is those soda fountain machines. If they're not up, and asset uptime isn't at the level and threshold that it needs to be, then the profitabilities dip as a result. And then I want to build on this phoning a friend trend that continues to be here, because God help me. It should have been part of my 8 predictions this year. I'm going to evangelize that we get rid of this dependency on phoning a friend. It is still 80% of the time, 81% last year. Field service engineers are phoning a friend. And, we did some cost breakdown analysis of that. We looked at average labor rates, $25 to $30 an hour for an engineer, average duration of a phone call. Let's say it's 15 minutes. That's 2 people getting stuck for 15 minutes. We said if 20% or 1 out of 5 gets stuck per day, and you have 500, 400, 300, 200, 100 engineers, all of a sudden it starts to like spiral out of control in terms of the impact of phoning a friend, right? And the throughput, the utilization. And there's a more macro level impact too. There's customer CSAT issues. To what degree does that impact churn? There's so many other aspects that kind of splinter and spider web off of this. And so it's no shock that, service leaders are prioritizing AI investments to upskill, reskill, present guided workflows, look for anomaly detection in terms of delivery and throughput, and lessen the dependency on that. I'm going to pick up the phone and call a friend. So when we looked at the service leaders agenda, we saw a jump from early part of 2023, January, 27% were prioritizing an investment in AI. In June, at the half point, we saw that jump to 49%. And recently, right now, early returns on our service leaders agenda, which we'll be publishing actually next week or the week after, we've seen it rise all the way up to 60%. It's the number one technology investment being prioritized this year, currently speaking. We're going to look at new versus expanded investments. There might be differences across those 2 categories, but AI is at the tippity top when you combine the 2. So I have a 2-part question for you.
Okay.
What percentage of pilots is Aquant witnessing achieve scale? How do we get out of that? I'll save the other one because I want to keep you on that train of thought first, and then we'll come behind with another one. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, to be frank and honest, for us, we've got pilots that are still in the process of converting, and we have pilots that have already converted. Truth be told, we haven't had a pilot not convert yet, but that's because of the length of runway we've had with our pilot process. So we haven't had sufficient time to, at this point, actually not have one convert. There are pilots where we're still in the in-between, like I was being honest with you. So we've got 2 pilots at the moment at this point are still in the process of conversion.
Yep. So it's kind of a function of letting it come to fruition.
Yeah, and I think it's really purely because of length of time. In terms of our Gen AI products, we have been out in the market since I think February last year. And so pilot motions that have kind of closed and then are in the process of implementing, that's why we've had ones convert and then we've got ones in progress. So it's just length of time.
Fair enough. So then let's get into the barriers for organizations. So what barriers are either halting or elongating the process from coming from pilot to scale?
Yeah, I would say the really interesting one for me is that I think I already mentioned earlier, everyone's got a different impression in terms of how they've received or been through those phases around IoT adoption. And some of us have been around when we've seen augmented reality come in and kind of go out of the service arena. Some people adopted kind of having machines kind of feed more information. We're all at that stage where I feel now everybody has got a system in which they're collecting service information. However, it's really around this caution around seeing technologies come into the service arena and then having seen what's happened there. On the back of that, with Gen AI, there's been quite a lot of press around, please be cautious, please really do your due diligence. And so it's encouraging formation of what we see that's new is these AI committees now forming to actually put in more rigorous checks around information security and data and where is it and what is really going on under the hood in terms of the technology stack and the safeguards. And I think it's not necessarily barriers, but I think it's just much more careful due diligence.
Yeah.
And it's no longer simply a decision that happens by a service leader. I think more and more now we're actually asking of that service, the end user to actually feed into the
Yeah.
decision process.
Yeah.
And so I think within the pilots, what we're seeing is that the key stakeholders that are making these decisions are looking to leverage that voice of the field
Sure.
as part of that decision-making process.
Yeah.
And to get a true voice, you need to have them actually get hands-on and give them time to actually feel and see what's the difference with and without. And I think that's great because we're actually seeing whether technology does what it says on the tin now in these pilot processes.
Yeah.
And I think that's for me, not necessarily barriers, but the things that we're seeing within the pilots that we have.
Sure. I love it. I love it. And I love the concept of responsible AI and cybersecurity, the protection of data and contextualizing of data, but then protecting it thereafter. There's all sorts of a heightened interest around the responsible use of information and intelligence. So I think that's really noteworthy that you bring that up. Let's build on this conversation and get to a concept that I know Aquant has been talking about with its customers, which is this whole concept of shifting left, right?
Mhm.
Which is kind of like simplifying, and it's a simplified strategy to get closer to the customer earlier in the journey, in terms of meeting them where they want to be met and avoiding issues earlier in their journey, if you will, right? So, for those that are listening, that's kind of like a boilerplate definition, but Aquan has its own viewpoints, and we're going to get to those in just a second. So, implementing it can be a little bit of a tricky process. It's pretty complex. So, what are the common challenges that organizations face when they try to shift left in their focus in terms of service delivery? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think common challenges with shift left that we see here at Quant is we really like to dive deep with our customers on understanding what is the problem with and without any technology.
Yeah,
What's the real underlying challenge that you're having in service? Where are you right now? Help us understand what are your pains, what are your challenges, walk us through your service process, and let's understand what are the real big areas of pain. Because
yeah,
sometimes when you're speaking to customers, they actually may perceive that that first line where a call's coming in, or maybe it's technical support that they actually need the help in. And
sure.
what we've discovered with our shift left framework is because we're covering the whole remit from initial kind of reporting, even in a chatbot, all the way through to kind of an initial call into the field and escalation and beyond, that sometimes the biggest source of pain may have been perceived to be in the field, but actually it's really in that call, or it could be in the
Yeah,
way that a customer can reach out.
yeah,
So for us, I think that has been the real eye opener,
yeah,
because your initial first impression when you're speaking to a contact of where the real challenge lies, you need to keep asking why. And then you actually get to the real source of the problem. And I think this is one thing that we've all taken away. And I think that's what makes Shift Left really actionable for us here at Aquant, is that you can get to the real underlying crux of the problem. And if you tackle that, then you genuinely see a shift left.
yeah. Hand up to the listening audience. Anybody here still encountering no fault found issues? Anybody here still encountering inaccurate triage and dispatch, where the wrong technician or engineer is dispatched to the wrong job, doesn't have the appropriate skill set requirements to solve something? Or perhaps they get there and they have the right skill set, but they don't have the right part, right? So shifting left, there's an opportunity to increase dispatch efficiency. There's an opportunity to perhaps even avoid dispatch, which our research suggests is anywhere from $250 scaling all the way up to $2,500 in some instances in terms of the cost of dispatch. So shifting left is something we're going to see a lot more focus on this coming year. We expect it to continue to rise in popularity. Do you have any customer stories or any customer examples in terms of smoothly transitioning to that shift left strategy? Can you any sort of noteworthy stories that you've encountered?
I think the interesting one was actually a customer that you've mentioned before, where when we initially spoke to them, we really did we went all guns blazing, really trying to help them with a field service solution.
Sure.
But actually, what they were really having a problem around, it was more the initial troubleshooting.
Yep.
And I think it really comes back to what you're talking about there, John, is because if you are much more effectively triaging in the first place, you
Yep.
have a much higher likelihood of first time fix because you've given the right information to the person who's going to get in front of that machine. And so spending a bit more and investigating that really helped us rather than go in and actually go straight to the field and give them guidance on troubleshooting when they're in front of the asset,
Sure.
taking that back a step and actually getting it at the crux of the reporting and more effectively diagnosing and troubleshooting at that stage helped really accelerate kind of for this particular customer our approach, but also ultimately it helped them in terms of where they were seeing the most pain financially.
Right.
And that happened as a consequence, really, of kind of digging in. And I think this is the thing with shifting left, because you kind of go through the service process and you think
Yeah.
about, I'm feeling the most pain in the field, but the reason why I'm feeling the most pain in the field is because we didn't do a good job on the initial problem diagnosis when they called in.
Right.
And it sounds so simple in retrospect, but actually, in the moment, and for that organization, that's where they were hearing the most and feeling the most pain.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's a good example of shift left when it comes to life.
Absolutely. And thank you to our listening audience who now is becoming our participating audience. We have a question submitted. Thank you to Nadim Mayan. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Tas is great and full of energy. I agree. Thank you for your insight, and John, for the podcast. For us running pilots, what is Tas's success factors in converting pilots? What does Aquant and the organization look at in terms of determining the success criteria of a successful pilot?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this is really about having a mutual success plan.
Mm.
Um, Simple is genuinely the best here when it comes to these kind of things. And as you go into a pilot, we've had that process with the customer where we've unpacked with them where they feel that their current challenge and pain is right now.
Yep.
The goal is to address that.
Yep.
And what we're looking to do in a pilot is actually hear from the actual user and understand and iterate with them in that pilot phase to actually get them to a point where the technology they're using is actually fit for purpose. Because you can think about it and you can conceptualize it, and we can all bake up really cool things in the office, and then when you actually go out to deploy it in the field or in the contact center, it then in real world terms there can be differences or glitches or unexpected behaviors, or the
Yeah.
way in which the language comes across may not kind of resonate well. And it's about ironing all those simple things out. And I think it's one of those amazing things that if you can take the most, how do I say this in a PC way, um, cynical adopter,
Yep.
and they get hands on and they find that it's helping them, genuinely helping them do a
Yeah.
better job,
Yeah.
then they will actually push you from kind of pilot to full scale deployment
Yeah.
because they want everyone to have what they've got.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And we had an expert on this, former Johnson Controls executive Jim Bond. He talked about change management, and he is a change management like ninja. And he talked about, you've got to be an architect of change. Like the architect needs to be there for the tear down and the rebuild, right?
Mm,
It has to be a fulfilling promise across that whole journey. You have to find the champions of change, and you have to personalize the change. Why are we doing this? What are we solving for? What is it going to improve? And then you got to communicate often. But a great resource if you want to listen back to it. Jim was one of our featured guests here and just went through all the series of steps for successful change management. So thank you, Nadim. Appreciate your contributions here. And we welcome other contributions from our listening and hopefully participating audience. Let's go further. We just published a research insight on crossing the chasm, and we captured some of the things that we've talked about and some other things in terms of the encountered challenges, etc. But we identified 5 critical steps for a smooth transition, and I'm hoping that we can maybe dive in and peel back the layer on each of those 5 stages. So those 5 stages are building the business case, preparing the organization for change, a proof of concept, a pilot analysis, and then how do you move to large scale deployment? So we've identified those as the 5 stages. So you're enabling major brands in the service industry, and far too many to list here, but a couple are Comfort Systems USA. You talked about Varian. I know Hologic and Ricoh and Beckman Coulter, many of which have been featured on our podcast and webinar series. So, what are the critical projected cost or business improvements that one can build into their business case or total cost of ownership analysis? What are you seeing more commonly infused in that analysis prior to a pilot?
Yeah, I think when you're building the business case, I mean, you're asking me to kind of get into the nuts and bolts in terms of the costs, but I want to just take that back a step. And actually, one of the key things that we've seen from a success point of view when it really comes to the business case is, does it make sense in terms of how it ties to the overall company objectives and strategy? Because before you even get into the numbers, you actually need to make sure that if you can clearly articulate that problem statement and it makes sense, and the executive leadership or your procurement team and all those different chains in which that business case is going to be received by, you need to be able to really clearly articulate that. It needs to make sense that we are all on the same path, really around that. And that's going to help you with that buy-in. Beyond this, your numbers need to be sensible. I'm sounding really cheeky and I'm not trying to be, but I've got to be honest, when you see these amazing kind of like business cases that have enormous savings, immediately what you think when you see these really large numbers in those business cases is, well, why is this service leader in a job? Because there is a shit ton, pardon my swearing, that can really be saved in this business. And so you need to really be cautious and really think about these business cases, because I see a lot of other vendors coming out there with way more than, realistic double-digit percentage savings on a cost base that really warrants asking that question around what else is really going on here. Because if you're expecting technology to have such an incredible impact, then what else is really going on under the tin? And so I think when you're thinking about your business case, these are just some of the things that you need to be thinking about. In terms of
Absolutely. Yeah. No, really great points. And let's build on this. The Service Council will be producing a series of content around total cost of ownership and building a business case. So look out for that. That'll come over the Q1 period. But let's get into the common denominators in terms of the steps organizations who are successful when they journey into this change effort. What are they doing? What is a more commonly deployed set of steps that they do in terms of managing and initiating the change?
Yeah, I think you mentioned change management, and that is one of the really important things. Getting prepared and ready for change is something that you cannot take lightly when it comes to software. I think there's some key ingredients. I think it's really around building the right team.
Sure.
And any good, effective implementation comes from the preparation. Like I said, the problem is if it's easy to articulate, people can get behind it. Pulling in those key stakeholders, really pulling in your A team, pulling in the champions of change. And those are really, for me, the most cynical or the most vocal, and turning them around means that you've really proven to yourself internally that they understand the problem, they understand the challenge, they want their life to be easier. They're finding that what this project or implementation is going to be around will really help them. And I think the one thing that I would say that, I've heard from Hologic and many other companies is that it's been a while since many companies have invested in service.
Yeah.
And you talked about people leaving, and it's really because they've not found the right fit technology to really genuinely help that frontline worker. We've
Yep.
deployed so many apps that when they're there in the moment of service, they have so many different buttons now to press and so many different applications. It's so non-cohesive for them. And I think really getting into the mindset of that service matter expert, the end user, and helping them to help you by advocating for this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's one of the keys for change.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love the topic of involving your A team. Right. And that's an important critical part of it as well. We heard that a lot from Jim Bond, the change management expert, former Johnson Controls gentleman. And he talked about being really careful with these major investments that you're making, because if you're not thoughtful about change management, monuments can be there for a long time, and monuments can be those failure moments just as well as they can be those successful moments. So you got to be really careful. Let's
Mm.
talk about AI. Where can it be applied? What can anything be AI'd? Is it, where do you suggest organizations target their efforts in terms of artificial intelligence? Is it on a singular product set? Is it on something else that how do you sort of frame out the pathway to a pilot?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question. What can be AI? I'd love it, John. Um, I think it really depends.
Sure.
And it really depends on what you're thinking about, because originally, when people kind of approached AI, they were actually thinking about what's the use case? What's the use case here? And now you're really flipping that on its head and asking me, well, what actually can be AI'd? And I think, gosh, there's a lot of different flavors of AI. You can think about AI in terms of speeding up administration. To your point, AI is great at creating kind of transcripts and summaries and providing information. We've all got either a Google Assistant, Siri, or Alexa, and we've all experienced you can ask a question and get a response. But I think in the service context, where I'm seeing kind of AI really have a game-changing experience in terms of what I feel, my personal impression of what can be AI, I think AI can really tackle the crux of the problem that I hear time and time again since time immemorial, which is, what is really the problem?
Yeah.
Because if you can figure out what really the problem is, that
Yep.
will drive all your KPIs in the right direction.
Yep. Yep.
And this is where I think the problem can be AI'd, John,
I love it.
because you can really AI troubleshooting. You can really AI knowledge search. You can really AI providing the in context analytics.
Sure.
And this is in the context of service, what I think can be AI'd effectively.
We have another participating audience member. Thank you to Samuel Newman, who asks, for smaller organizations that are looking to implement AI solutions but don't necessarily have the resources to build their own AI architecture, where does one go to buy their AI?
Great question, Samuel. I think this is so interesting for me because Samuel, I'm so used to actually hearing the opposite end of the spectrum is all this AI malarkey just makes me want to go and build it myself. And you're actually
Yeah.
asking me the opposite question, which is, how do I go and buy this stuff? Um, I would say that if you're really looking to go and buy AI, it's really about actually thinking about what is the service problem that you have within your organization, because there are a lot of vendors out there in the marketplace. And this is where maybe you're, like many people, finding it really confusing. And so the one thing that I would say is actually look for proven success
Sure.
for companies that you're not going to be their first time. You're not going to be their second time. They've got customers who are on this journey, and you can speak to other organizations that are a bit like you, that have a similar challenge to you, and that have gone through the process, and they can share, tips, pains, pitfalls, and some of the things that they needed to do to actually be successful. And so that would be my advice to you is
Outstanding.
you can Google search, you can even ask ChatGPT what's the right AI for my particular problem, and it will give you a whole bunch. But when you do get that list, that's how I think you should go the next step in evaluating, Samuel.
Love it. Thank you for that answer, and thank you, Samuel, for the question. Let's get back to the topic, the stages that we were looking at. We're kind of digging in on the stages,
Mhm.
and I want to ask around the success measurement and the tipping point to that aha moment where it's like, okay, this was successful, and now we're going to go to scale with AI. And I want to ask that, but I also want to ask you, are there kind of prioritize KPIs that you are like, those are the golden ticket? What are your three golden KPIs that you see common amongst best in class organizations as you look at your customers?
Um,
So two-part question.
yeah, this is an interesting one. I'm going to go with the golden KPIs and why.
Sure.
Um, and I think this is interesting for me because I was listening to actually Smith's Detection recently,
Sure.
and Ben Sutton there, who's the head of global service, he speaks incredibly eloquently about data and service performance. And I think it was interesting listening to him really boil it down to if you're really serious about your customers and really serious about providing good service performance, then you need to get really serious about your service data. It's as simple as that. And I think from that, I think about many of our customers that are manufacturers, and therefore, for them, the important KPIs are actually things like cost per machine per year, which is not one of the typical service KPIs. But for them, this unpacks such a rich amount of information because you then have so many nuances around what's really going on. And if this machine is costing me so much more, why is it doing that? And getting into the crux of that and how many people have been to visit that machine and what kind of repairs have been going on. And I also think coupling that with time between the services incidents is a very rich metric because it makes you really want to look at, well, did that preventive maintenance visit,
Right.
was that really effective? Because we've been then again within a certain period of time. And I think the time between service incidents is a real measure of quality in terms of your service offering that I think is interesting to me. And then I've got to be honest, there's one good old fashioned favorite, which is first time fix. And for me, I do believe it is one of the golden KPIs because I'd be remiss to not kind of talk about that is really one of the driving forces of service because we all want to get it right first time, not just in service, but in everything we do. And I think
Sure.
it resonates so easily with so many people. There's a lot of complexity in how people measure it.
Sure.
And we can have a whole podcast on that on its own. But for me, it's got to make my top three.
Absolutely. And for those listening, audience members here, we the Service Council has recently welcomed a new VP of Research and Advisory that's joining our team. And upon his onboarding, we're going to be looking into modeling and simulating KPI and performance improvement. And what does it mean to the business in terms of impact? But also, when does it make sense? What is the cost to improve? And does it make sense to improve in certain metrics at all times? So stay tuned for that. That's going to be a Q2 series of content that we produce. And we'll be introducing formally this new VP of Research and Advisory here in the coming week. So stay tuned for that. Let's get into, by the way, I love your answer to that last question. I think that was a great discussion you just led us through. Let's get into the learning moments because you have the benefit of focusing on enablement and empowerment of these customer engagements, and you're a big part of the conversion, the success, the modeling, etc. What are some of the learning moments though that have come from that? So maybe that it's not always just success and good stuff. Sometimes there's some pitfall avoidance scenarios where you can help frame that out for an organization considering a similar journey. so that they don't step foot in the wrong area? Any pitfall avoidance scenarios that you've encountered?
Yeah, I think I've got to be honest, there's been a lot of learning. So this has
Yeah,
been a really golden time for us here at Aquant, for me personally, and many of my colleagues. And I've mentioned it before, but I think it's worthwhile kind of revisiting here. Is there's always going to be hesitation in adopting new technologies, because every single one of us has a personal attitude to risk, and then you have a
yeah,
corporate attitude to risk, and then you have these additional committees and steps. And so as you go into pilots and think about what are the success criteria, it's about building that in from the start.
yeah,
You need to very early face that information security hurdle, or whatever those additional requirements or stringent any additional scrutiny that you think is required of the proposed change to the technology stack.
yeah,
Face that head on, in
yeah,
terms of what does good look like, what do I need to unpack for you in terms of an assessment, what is the company's attitude to risk around this. Just have those conversations early,
sure,
is one of the key things I would say. And I think it's okay to allow people to go through that process at
yeah,
the right pace for them. And so allowing that to happen alongside, the second thing that I would say is, the gotcha moment for me is, many companies have really thought, right, well, with AI, we can build it ourselves, or we can adopt some parts of this, and they're not thinking about where it fits in the overall process.
yep,
And this is one of the things that you really need to double down on, and this is where a pilot really helps, is because figuring out the overall service process
hmm,
and where this technology is going to flow, so that it has the least amount of friction for the
sure,
end user in terms of using it. So like I was saying early on, we've provided lots of different apps and made it really, challenging in the moment when you're in front of a machine, or while you're on a call or under pressure. So think about that user experience and make this as frictionless as possible for them to adopt. And if that is part of what you're thinking about, then you're going to actually get more SME buy-in. So those key subject matter experts, or that key initial user group, have this in mind when you're speaking to them. Talk to them about it.
yeah,
Understand how they're going to be touching the technology. And I think it's also around habit. They've got existing habits, and
yeah,
how do we build this in for them as a new habit, or how does it become a natural part of the flow?
yeah,
And so those two things I would say.
yeah.
Um, think early about the risk and people's attitude to risk, and really think deeply about the user experience.
I also want to caution our listening audience to um, you mentioned setting realistic expectations earlier. I think was one of the things, like be realistic. And I think, as you start to frame the projected impact of an investment in AI within the context of your four walls and your organization, modeling it against other organizations might not be fair, right? Setting those metric achievements that from another organization who had all these success criteria, they might not be applicable to your business. It might be different. Your company is unique from the company that you're modeling against. And there's some nuance that doesn't make it a fair assessment. So think about your own business and projected improvements rather than always thinking about modeling it after someone else and what they've already done, right? Because that can set an unrealistic expectation that might not be achievable. And so, that's another thing to consider and be cautious of. It can be a little bit of a rat hole if you try to keep up with the Joneses and you can't, right? So
Yeah,
just like be careful in terms of modeling the success criteria, because the success criteria in your business is unique from that of any other organization. So be cautious there.
yeah.
I
Got
want
a
to talk
quick
about, yeah, please
example
go,
on
yeah,
that
come on,
one.
yeah,
We had one of our service leaders actually. gave us a challenge here at Aquant. And
Yeah,
this really goes to show that in every company, the metric around how long it takes a technician to onboard is completely different. So in this
absolutely.
particular company, I'm going to tell you how bad it was, but the challenge was to get a technician onboarded in less time than it takes for someone to actually make a baby. So, under 9 months is what they wanted to do because they have a very complex product set. And so onboarding technicians, especially in some of the industries that you've talked about, John, where
Yeah,
there is risk to life, where calibrations need to be incredibly specific, even the right type of screw and alloy used within that screw is critical to performance. And so it can take a really long time to make sure that you feel that you can actually deploy somebody out there in the field. And I think this is really interesting that for that customer, trying to get their onboarding down to 9 months,
yeah,
other customers will be, well, that's just so way off. It takes us, completely different lengths of time. And I
yeah,
think it really underlines the point that we're all at different points in the journey.
absolutely.
And wherever you are, we are respectful and looking to just get you to a destination.
A-
Better is better for
Absolutely.
everyone.
Absolutely. I love it. And that time to value metric that you're talking about is shocking. It was completely absent when we did our KPI and metrics survey last year from the employee class of metrics, and it's risen all the way up to number 4 this year. So it came out of like nowhere. Time to value has become a really critical metric for the employee side of measurement. Around some of the other metrics like engagement and all the other things, retention, et cetera. Let's transition the conversation. Let's talk about future proofing and what's next in terms of growth in the AI category. Where do you think we are in terms of market adoption currently speaking, and where do you think it's heading in terms of the next 1 to 2 years? How are we trending?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting space that we're in right now, John.
Sure is.
12 months ago, we didn't have co-pilots on the market. Gen AI was a hot topic, but people were still trying to get their heads around it. And people were figuring out, so Gen AI, what's that? Oh, it's generative AI. What's generative AI? How does that, what kind of an AI is that?
Yeah.
And now we've moved on to almost like the next stage where we've got companies actually live and using generative AI and all types
Sure.
of AI flavors in their offerings. So where do I see us right now? I feel like right now we're in the test and try phase.
Yeah.
And I feel that in the next 12 months, I see there being a real refinement of the technology. And actually, what I really see happening is success and failure because,
Hmm.
and I want to give that a little bit of context. So, we've seen technologies come into the service arena, and some have stuck around and some
Yeah.
haven't.
Yeah.
I do feel that the application of AI makes a lot of common sense. It's been the natural evolution here.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like we're in this refinement phase where it's
Yeah.
iterate and tweak and test and let's see it prove itself out. And
Sure.
this is where I feel we are in the next kind of 12 months. I also feel that it gives a lot of customers who are listening to this time to really validate the claims that are being made by vendors of AI in this space and to see whether they're actually getting the true results they need in terms of helping them solve those challenges.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think being in the prove it phase is where we are right now. It's a really nice
Absolutely.
place to be.
Absolutely. I would build off of your comments around this whole concept of, as you're change managing your way through an AI pilot to scale, and the importance of communicating that this technology is not replacement of human. It is not a, how do we get rid of people? I think, we've heard a lot about, how do we connect technology and process together, functional and technical roadmaps. That was a lot of topic of last year's symposium and kind of threaded throughout our coverage last year. I think this year we're going to hear a lot more about the threading of the human experience and the digital experience. And I think that it's important as you're communicating the pathway to taking AI to scale. that you talk about it from that perspective, that it's not replacement, it is a fusing together of that human and digital experience. And I think that's a real important one, especially from the point of view of not disenfranchising your workforce and making them get further disengaged in terms of their commitment to being a field service engineer. So that's just another cautionary tale that I would put on the table for discussion. But let's close out the discussion, Taz. This has been awesome. What a great resource for our listeners. And for our listeners, can they get to know you a little bit more on the personal level? What tell us something you're looking forward to, or a passion outside of work, or something about yourself?
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting, John. When you originally connected with me, it was in December, and we were thinking about doing this podcast after, the break. And one of the things that I had actually done outside of work was I decided to go and sleep rough for a night. If you remember, John.
I caught this. I caught this on the social media. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
honestly, sleeping rough at the back end of November in the freezing cold. I'm so thankful that it didn't rain that evening. But trying to sleep outdoors, I was sleeping actually kind of adjacent to a graveyard by a church that was letting me know the time on the hour every hour, with a whole bunch of other people sleeping rough. And actually, going out and meeting some of these people and finding out how they got into that situation,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
meeting people who had got themselves out of sleeping rough and were back there again, and why they were back there. And I think it's been a passion of mine to always understand those people that you see in the street and why they're there.
Yeah.
And I actually got under the surface of that and actually kind of ticked that box for myself, not in a way to not for kind of any really for me. I think it was just why are people
Yeah.
like that, and what can I do to really understand better. And I felt like I really tick that box for
That's great.
myself.
That's
And
great.
I think it is something that I am really, like you said, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about understanding, and I think it's the curiosity. Because deep down, I know I'm not going to solve homelessness globally. There's,
Yeah.
let's be realistic. But just trying to understand and having the humility to be curious about it, I think, was where I was at. And to go through the experience was amazing. I also raised a lot of money
That's great.
and a
That's
lot of
great.
awareness by doing it, which even you got to see on social media. Would I do it
Absolutely.
again?
That's
I
outstanding. That's outstanding. Yeah, maybe you do it again, but maybe you'll pick a warmer time of year.
Yeah, I think doing a summer sleep out sounds way more appealing than doing it at the end of November. It was
Yeah.
really genuinely.
There's a thing called glamping, so you can make it glamorous. Glamorous camping. It's kind of this fusion of two things here. But no, I applaud you on that. That's really special and touching. And we hand out a services humanity award. The whole notion that service and it can be a function of humanity, and I think that's a great example of services humanity right there. So kudos to you. And I want to thank you. This has been a tremendous resource for our listening audience. Thank you, Aquant, for bringing today's podcast to our guests. We're gonna have to do this again sometime, so we'll circle up and see when we can get another one rescheduled. Thank you for joining, Taz.
You're welcome. As always, John, it's a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Outstanding. So, to our listening audience, thank you for joining and participating as well. This session is recorded. It's accessible on LinkedIn. It's accessible at the Service Council's website. I think a copy of it will be at Aquant's website. So, please learn more about Aquant by visiting their website as well. Thank you for joining. We'll see you on the next one.